We are going to stay in the field of innovation, but we are going to apply innovation to a slightly different context, completely different context, the context of medicine regulations. In the next session, we are going to look at the necessary bridges between medicine regulations and innovation. The title of the session, From Lab to Patients, How to Make the Way Europe Regulates Medicine Future-Proof. So, a very important question that I'm going to let my colleague Simon Pickard, the Network Director at Science Business, the pleasure to lead. Simon, over to you.
Marilyn, thank you very much, and a warm welcome again to everybody who's joining us for the closing session of our morning part of the conference. And today we are very pleased to announce the public launch of a new science business initiative called the Future-Proofing Medicines Programme. Now, why are we starting a new initiative and what's it all about? Well, as many of you may be aware, Europe is embarking on a huge process, a very ambitious process at the moment, of redoing, revamping and revising 60 plus years of pharmaceutical and medicinal legislation. There's a bold new strategy that sets out the areas in which Europe wants to be a global leader in health and life sciences, how to become more resilient in the face of the next pandemic, and how to make new therapeutics and medicines more affordable and accessible to patients across the continent. So how is this all going to fit together with the rapid advances in disruptive science and technology across the health and life science spectrum? When Europe looks to the future and sets out its strategy and creates its new framework of regulations, how can we think about these in 10, 20 years into the future? How can the framework be agile, flexible, and innovative enough to allow these disruptive new technologies to flourish and ultimately benefit healthcare systems and patients in Europe and beyond? So, to address this, we are convening a new series of public debates over the next couple of years, which we're calling the Future-Proofing Medicines Initiative. It's a multi-stakeholder gathering of experts coming from different parts of the health and life sciences spectrum, from industry, from science, and from public sector organizations to think about what the future could look like and how European research and innovation can genuinely become a world leader and remain there in the next 10 to 20 years. So I'll run through the partners at the close of the session when we issue our call to action. But to launch this first public discussion on future-proofing medicines, I'm delighted to be joined by three very eminent figures in the field. Doug Gregory, who's the Senior Director for EU Government Affairs Strategy and Excellence at Bristol Myers Squibb. Ole-Petter Ottersen, the President of Karolinska Institutet in Stockholm, my apologies. And last but not least, Alfonso Valencia, who's the Director of the Life Sciences Division at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center in Spain. So gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the three of you. I understand we might be having a little bit of audio problems with Professor Ottersen, so we'll get the conversation going with Doug and Alfonso to begin with. So, gentlemen, an opening question. In the next 10 to 15 years, what do you think are going to be the technologies and the domains in health and life sciences that transform healthcare as we know it today? What do you think we need to be anticipating in terms of the regulatory framework around health and life science research and innovation? Let's start with an industry view first. Doug, over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon. A great question. And I think one of the challenges when we're in the midst of looking at a revision of our legislation in a European perspective, it is that importance of looking forward and trying to get some perspectives. I guess from our perspective, we see three basic themes of advancement in different types of sciences: in medical science, in data science, and even in regulatory science. I was reading a most recent article from Nature magazine in late January, 27th of January, and they talk about 7 technologies to watch in 2022. So not looking 10 years out, but looking actually in this year. And in there are some fundamental transformations that are going to really impact science, and particularly medical and molecular science. And they talk a little bit about how we can now actually fully map a full human genome, how we can, using advanced data technology, create protein folding structures and to understand how proteins fold, which is critical to the development of new therapies. We're looking at quantum simulation. We're also looking at the opportunity to do a more precise manipulation of genomes. If you think of CRISPR technology, this takes CRISPR technology one step further and looks at it not just from how CRISPR was able to separate genomes, but actually how we can actually use advanced CRISPR technologies to combine things. So there's a huge amount of technology and advancement in science. And when I look through that article, there are references to major European universities and European companies that are leading this. So I think the world is, and we should be very optimistic about the future. But I think it's really around those three areas: the advancement in data and analytical science, the advancement in medical science and molecular biology in particular, as well as the advancement in regulatory science.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Doug. And I think we'll certainly come to the questions of how these three intersect and can support the future European frameworks going forward a little later in the session. But now let me turn to Ole Petter Ottersen. Ole, you're in charge of one of the world's leading medical and life science research universities. If you're looking into your glass ball, what do you think the future holds in the next 10 to 15 years, both in terms of technologies and the groundbreaking research that your faculty members are doing, but perhaps also the future of life sciences, how we actually define what they are and what their meaning is to society? So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, these were many questions at one time, so I think I will go into the first one now, and perhaps we can come back to some of the other questions. It's always difficult to look into the crystal ball, but of course I share Doug's optimism about the future, because the technology development is progressing at a speed that is increasing almost by the day. So, but there is one issue that is really pertinent to this discussion, and that is that if we now shall be able to harness, utilize this explosion in new technologies, we have to be proactive when it comes to regulatory and ethical issues. And when I was preparing for this meeting, I sort of harked back to the digital revolution, because you can always argue, was the digital revolution successful or not? But I think we now see the success of the digital revolution. I think, I dare say, that one of the key issues that made the digital revolution at least partly successful was that the lawmakers, those that looked into the ethical issues when it comes to digital applications, and those who looked into the IP issues, they were, in fact, in many ways proactive. And now we have to do exactly the same thing when it comes to these new technologies. We have to be proactive when it comes to regulatory science, and also, not least, when it comes to the ethical issues. The crystal ball tells me, of course, what we see today is that there is a dramatic development when it comes to new vaccines, for example, in the wake of the mRNA technologies. The 3D printing techniques will soon give us, I dare say, new organs, perhaps not soft tissue organs, but bone for replacement of destructed bone, and improve, in fact, the situation for many patients with joint problems, for example. And we see technology coming in, perhaps in unexpected areas. Delivery drones for drugs, and in acute medicine, drones already have a very important place. But there are three issues in my crystal ball that I would like to raise with you. And I would also ask, what can we do when it comes to regulatory science to remove the obstacles for really harnessing the power of these new techniques? One is, in fact, techniques that can be incorporated under the term precision. I'm not talking about traditional precision medicine. I mean, this is something that has been on the screen for many years. But what we are seeing now, and I ask you, how should we regulate this, is precision prevention coming up, preventive health, where every one of us can use our smart watches or whatever to really gather data from our own lives. So this is, in fact, a very interesting issue because we blur the line somehow between consumer use and medical use when it comes to these smart watches and gadgets that accumulate information from our own bodies for prevention, for precision prevention. For example, now we are talking about, that's just one example, we are talking about how we can have precision nutrition to really guide the patients to eat food that is aligned with the person's medical situation. And this is something that has to be regulated somehow, and I ask you how to do that. The other point, I have 3 points, and we can go back to them, of course, is something that happens at a tremendous speed in my own field. I'm a neurobiologist, and that is the brain-computer interface, where we link our central nervous system to computers, to technical devices. There was a paper yesterday, in fact, in Nature Medicine that I think is mind-boggling, how one can now, with sophisticated electrical stimulation techniques, really help patients with spinal cord injuries. This is something that also calls for regulatory science. How shall we regulate, validate all these new innovations at the interface between computers and brain? And the third, and this is a huge issue, is how can we now apply artificial intelligence in clinical practice, integrate artificial intelligence in clinical practice in a way that is fair, accountable, and transparent.
Very good. Thank you for that, Otter. That's a very rich set of insights for us to pick up on in the next few minutes. So let me bring in Alfonso. You've queued him up quite nicely in terms of artificial intelligence and, of course, the huge developments that are happening in advanced computing, high-performance computing, and what that has in terms of transformative impact in health and life sciences. Alfonso, what do you see as the key trends, the key trajectories in data science, in high-performance computing, and similar, that can take us into the next generation of therapeutics and medicines development?
Yeah, I wish I will know what is going to happen. I mean, certainly has realized that we are not very good in predicting the future. What I see are, as you pointed out, like three areas of development that are growing independently and very fast. All this area of computing that I'm very much into, high performance computing, the new generation of computers, the new ways of computing, and the new infrastructures. That goes hand with all the developments in artificial intelligence, machine learning. For the first time this year, we have seen a full area of research, predicting protein structures, essentially being transformed in a few months. And now we have very reliable models for every protein we know. So I think this has been a fantastic achievement based on work during years, but has crystallized in a few months. And this is only the beginning. We are going to see this transformative capacity of artificial intelligence applied to many other areas of biology or biomedicine. One of them is natural language processing that goes as part of the artificial intelligence. As we see now the large language models, mainly in English, but soon in other languages, that are really amazing in terms of, almost understanding language. We can say that with a lot of applications in many fields, but with a lot of very important applications in medicine. So all this area of computing, artificial intelligence, natural language processing is really developing very fast. It has been mentioned at the same time, the development of molecular biology, genomics. Again, a very fast developing area. Now, all the new developments in single-cell sequencing, for the first time in the last, 5 years, we have this capacity to see what is happening at the cellular level. to see in a tumor thousands of cells, individual information about thousands of cells. This is absolutely transformative. And it's not the only technology. There are many other technologies in molecular biology that are changing day by day and producing amazing discoveries at the biological level and potentially amazing capacity for transforming what we know about science and what we translate to medicine. And at the same time, and the third one is medicine itself, and we have seen some of them mentioned just before, no? The new imaging technologies with increasing capacities to follow in vivo, high resolution, different type of technologies. The devices, we only see now the very early days of very simple devices. This is going to be huge. The possibility of tracking individuals in continuous for many variables. That's is something is almost a dream and is around the corner. So all these together are like three lines of development that goes each one of them on their own. And now, on the collision, the three of them, it's spectacular what can happen, no? And hopefully, there will happen many positive things, and I'm optimistic about the possibilities of putting together computing, molecular biology, and medicine. Now, at the same time, we have to be careful in doing this, in a sense, in order and following the rules, because some of these technologies can be very invasive and will be really detrimental if we go too early or too out of control in the application of some of these technologies into medicine.
Great.
And I think that goes very much with these ideas of sensible applications of machine learning.
Okay, thank you, Alfonso. That's super. Now, it strikes me that possibly the red thread that links all of these together is data. And obviously advances in data science, computing, and so forth are a critical part of the development. But the actual use and access to data itself is obviously going to be a huge part of the future dynamics and frameworks around European research and innovation. So in terms of sort of the scientific operating environment, what are some of the big changes that need to happen, or at least some of the most promising developments at EU level, whether it's in terms of the health data space, use of real-world data in trials, etc. What do you see as the critical data issues that will need to be addressed or considered as Europe moves forward? Doug, let's start with you on this.
Thanks, Simon. I think this demonstrates a couple of things. One is that if you just look at one particular scientific discipline, your perspective is probably a little bit too narrow. If we look more broadly and we look at what the European institutions and the Commission is leading in terms of data policy, we have a Data Governance Act, we have a Digital Markets Act, we have a Digital Services Act, we have the European Health Data Space that you talked about, we have the existing challenges around a movement of data between Europe and other parts of the world, and ensuring that the principles and values of data protection that we have embedded in our legal frameworks in Europe are understood and we're able to deal with those in a multilateral context. And then I think also there are different ways. Sometimes we talk about moving data to where the computer is and where the analysis will be done. But in many ways, when we look at different types of networks, we can actually move the algorithm, the piece of software that's inquiring into the data, we can move that to where the data is. So there are lots of ways of looking at this. I think the challenge is that data is exploding right now. There is more and more data that's and useful data. And the challenge, I think, for us is how do we make sure that we have interoperable systems? How do we make sure that our data is coded the same way so that data that is collected in Sweden is usable in Spain and vice versa? If different countries and different healthcare systems codify their data differently, then the challenge of interpretation and analysis of that data is more complex than it would need to be.
Thank you, Doug. Ollie, what would really help your scientists most in the data context?
Well, what is said about data, I mean, it doesn't only apply to exchange of data between countries, but also within countries. We are seeing this in Sweden now, that during the pandemic, we should have hoped for even more efficient exchange of data between the different regions of Sweden. So this applies to, I mean, this problem applies to all levels, I think, also to the country level. I think data sharing, that's the key also for artificial intelligence. And there is, as you know, there is in fact a danger here. If we cannot gather data seamlessly, you can easily introduce biases in models and algorithms, and that will perhaps hurt, not least, minorities and those that are vulnerable. And this is something we, by all means, have to avoid. So what I see is that we need to have a discussion also on the European level, and even more forceful discussion, not least when it comes to the European health data space, that there are two moral imperatives that we have to take into consideration. Of course, one moral imperative is to have an adequate data protection and privacy, but also there is a moral imperative when you have data. There is a moral imperative that you can use this data for the betterment of health. So we have to look at both sides here. How to ensure, and the keyword, of course, is also interoperability, how we can ensure this at the EU level. That is a very important question, and we hope really from Sweden, and I think the same goes for other countries in Europe, that we can find a way where we can find the optimal balance between these two moral imperatives. So, but what will be the solution eventually? Well, that's another question for the crystal ball.
And certainly a question for the Future-Proofing Medicines Initiative, if I may be so bold. So I'm going to reframe the question for Alfonso in the international context. Right? I mean, as Europe moves forward with its own regulatory innovations and rethinking the framework around the development of new drugs and therapeutics, the world isn't holding back. They're moving forward at the same time with their own reflections and their new rules and their new standards. So, you know, as a world-leading supercomputing center dealing with vast amounts of data, Alfonso, is it possible that we can reach sort of an international standard, even a global standard, on what is considered safe, high-quality, usable data and evidence in life sciences?
Yeah, I hope so. This is what we work for. I think there's enough technology to make this possible all around this federated learning and federated data access. So keeping the data in the legal framework, being able to access the data, keeping the legal frameworks, and being able to learn in a machine learning spirit from the distributed data. Associated to something else that we call the compute continuum, being able to move the compute to wherever it is needed at the right level. And then there are the global organizations taking care of developing the technological framework. In particular, in the case of genomics, the activities of the Global Alliance for Genomic Health has been essential. This is a multinational organization creating the instruments and the software and the recommendations and the regulations around the use of genomic data, and that has been instrumental in terms of how to access the data and the regulations to access the data and the software to make this possible. A database that is the European Genome Phenome Archive that can work in this federated model is an essential instrument in this construction. And the other, to mention another important activity, is the coalition of the databases trying to create a sustainable model for how we keep the databases that are essential in molecular biology and obviously for everything we do in biology and in medicine, how these are distributed and in many different countries, how we create a global model to what is a core database and how this has to be maintained, sustainability of the data. So I think there are enough good spirit and enough global organizations to create these standards, not only the standards, also the software to make this interoperability of the data possible. Maybe the technical problems are easier to solve than some of the political problems in this area.
Indeed. Well, we'll see how this evolves in the months to come. Now, I have one final question for the three of you, which brings together all of these, the perspectives on the disruptive emerging technologies, the challenges around data, the digital advances as well. We look to the future, and we need to have, I think, more flexibility and innovation within the regulatory system. So how do we create safe experimentation for these new technologies? We obviously need to maintain safety, we need to have exceptionally high standards, but we need to innovate. We need to be proactive, as Olli Petter said at the beginning. So what might those safe experimentation spaces look like, where Europe's health and life science leaders can come together with public authorities, with patient groups and other key stakeholders to see what works and what can have the greatest impact in European and potentially global healthcare? Doug, would you like to take this first?
Thanks very much, Simon, and again, thanks for organizing this this seminar today. I think first and foremost, it's important to realize where we are relative to other parts of the world. So if we look at authorization of medicines, the median time to authorization in Europe is 426 days. The median time to authorization in the United States is 244 days. That's 182 days difference, or 6 months difference. In Europe, we tend to be slower than Canada, Japan, and Australia. So there's a lot of opportunity. Our model is more complex. We have 27 medicines agencies that collaborate through the European Medicines Agency as that collaboration hub. But I think there are lots of opportunities for us to try and streamline and simplify that. European Medicines Agency staff has remained stable at 880 people over the last 5 years. It's clear that we need increased resources in our regulatory networks, both at a European level and at a member state level. And I think there's also opportunities for digitization and cloud storage platforms for information sharing of dossiers, visibility of all information by all relevant people. I think those are real opportunities. I think there are also a couple of global collaboration opportunities that are being left on the table. I look particularly at two, something called Project Orbis, which is a collaborative review program with 7 countries: the United States, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Switzerland, the UK, and Israel. These are areas where regulators are collaborating with medicines developers to try and identify and deal with new technologies that are coming forward. The medicines development process is moving much more into an iterative, circular model of medicines development. And I think our regulatory models need to reflect that. And I think there are opportunities for what sometimes are referred to as regulatory sandboxes, where new innovations are brought to regulators within a framework that assures that new scientific developments are taking place with oversight, but those sandboxes have some flexibility so that people can bring new innovations and new technologies to regulators, and regulators can adapt and understand those technologies, and so that we're developing within an authorization and oversight framework.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Doug. And I'm just looking at the time. So we're going to wrap up the session now. But in terms of the Future-Proofing Medicines Initiative, this is the beginning of a whole series of discussions that will pick up on the themes discussed today and various other issues. It's going to be a bit of a traveling roadshow. We're going to bring these discussions to different parts of Europe to hear what stakeholders in both health policy, research and innovation policy, and leaders in practice think about the future and how we can create the world-leading health and life science environment where our science, our technology, and our innovation in Europe are really setting the standards for the rest of the world to follow. So, along with Bristol Myers Squibb, Karolinska, and Barcelona Supercomputing Center, we have the University of Tartu and the University of Luxembourg, who form part of the core group of partners. But this is also an open invitation for other organizations out there who care about these topics and would be interested in a high-level, independent expert regulation European medicines future-proof, then please visit our space, our booth in the exhibition hall, or send us an email after the conference, and we'll be delighted to pick up the conversations with you about joining us on this exciting journey. So with that, my sincere thanks to Doug, to Ole-Petter, and to Alfonso for your time, your insights, and your wisdom today, and we look forward to carrying these discussions on with you and with colleagues in the months to come. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Marilyn on the other side of the studio. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for this excellent discussion. I also want to give the prize of the best background images for these three panelists who were there with you. I think that they are the best set we've seen so far in the conference, so thank you, gentlemen. With that, there was actually a wrap for this morning. We will be back at 3:30 this afternoon with, again, interesting topics to cover. At 3:30 Brussels time, we're going to start with climate tech, and the question on the table is how will we deliver solutions for the world? Nothing less. And after that, we'll talk about EU-US relationship, and we're finally going to wrap up this conference with a session of what should Horizon deliver by the end of 2022. So, thank you for joining us this morning, and Simon will be here instead of me to welcome you at 3:30, so just a little more than 3 hours, which will give you plenty of time to do other things and to fully focus on the Science Business Conference again. So we'll see you back at 3:30. Thank you.